All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to Unslaved. We're back here with Michael. We're going to be talking about the psychology of guilt, and really interested to get into this. I'll be continuing some of the themes we did last week. So good to see you, Michael, and let's begin.
Well, yeah, I've got the first slide. I've entitled this Disharmonious based on some of the themes that we find in the Prisoner series, which we always like to dip into now and again. The whole idea of what it means to be disharmonious and unmutual, a show that was way ahead of its time. Um, and then I'll be mentioning a book as well, Disease to Please, kind of touches on some of the things we're going to look at today, especially if anyone listening likes the material and realizes, somebody in their family or somebody they know has a chronic issue. you know, uh, there is help out there, um, because as you said last week, uh, we saw these four types. Now, this woman doesn't mention any. The author of that book doesn't mention the four types, but strangely, I happen to find that her book actually does deal with one of those types. Go to the next slide. We mentioned those last week, and again, no particular order, right? But we gave a sketch, and the one we're going to be looking at today is really the last one, because they're all fascinating, and the depressive is fascinating too. Um, they're the ones who can't say no to anybody. Uh, the kind of people pleasers, and it just so happened I remember this lady's book and went ding. She talks about that type. Um, Let me see if there's a connection. I went back and read it, and sure enough, the whole book is really about uh, depressives, and of course, that type needs to be explored. It's really important, and when we get closer to the end, we'll see how important it is to absolutely, I mean, it GPSs straight into where we are right now, but it's just general. It's interest in general because of typologies. So this is a kind of, as I say, the whole sense of value that type has. Now, we're talking borderline and extreme. What I'm going to say affects all of us. We all care about other people, and we all like to serve other people, and we all like to be liked. So it's not. That's what the word normal means, and abnormal. It's beautiful to see in typology through psychology how an abnormal situation. It's very important in lots of areas of life to see how the abnormal child is growing up, or the abnormal family, or the abnormal state, the abnormal leader, the scout leader, mad as hell, right. So it's important to know the abnormal in things, and this is what we're doing here. So, but again, those traits are in all of us, right? But this is the type whose entire sense of personal value is invested in the good that they do for other people, and how much they may be liked by other people. You know which sounds okay on paper, and that's part of the problem, that it sounds okay, on paper. And of course, this type, generally speaking, might have been brought up this way, forced by parents, a terrible mother, or even just a sort of a terrible family background where you never say no. You have to share everything with your siblings. Um, you really have no private space. And your value is, again, in being nice, being extrovert, being bubbly, and all of that. And usually it's demanded, like it is across the four types, across the whole of infantilism, growing up, as we call it, in general. People aren't asking you to do this and that and the other. They don't ask you in school, and they don't ask you at home. It's a demand, soft demand, hard demand, whatever. Um, but even if you're not sort of ordered and bossed about in some sort of militaristic way, don't you see that your obligations are one? You'll be sort of seduced into compliance, because really you're too young to realize how power mad and hypocritical your parents are. They're head honchos. They rule the roost. They say jump, and you say how high, right? So, and then again later on, well, even quite young, it can flip, because this particular depressive type can also turn around a little bit, manipulate the fact that they do serve others well, and turn that. You get this type of person in the office, where they are turning it around. But you get it in the family and a marriage as well, where they're going to use their ultra uber kindness towards you as a kind of way to get you feeling obligated. How many times, when you have a slumber party and the friends who are meant to come bring a whole mass of other friends that you have to feed in the evening and then in the morning, and you're thinking to yourself, I'd love to turn around and say, hey, 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 we told you four to come, not this horde. Well, we let them away with it. You see, so there's a perfect example, and this happens time and time again at work. How many times have I told you I don't like to do that? I don't like to see that happen, and you're parking in the wrong place, or your protocol is wrong, or the approach that you have to customers is wrong, and over again. But we don't, because the person's somehow manipulated us into a corner of doing things that are, quite helpful. And the last thing that you then do to a very ultra helpful neighbor or person is berate them. You give them a lot of room to maneuver, a lot of wriggle room, which can be used against you. So just realize that some of these types we're talking about, hysterics, are the bubbliest, the nicest to be with, always pull you out of yourself, or usually very nice to be with if you're in a depressed mode and all. Yeah, but you think these are just people from some fairyland, that you've been sent? Watch out. A time will come when that level of superficiality and all, shows its dark side. But of course, talking about that, we said last week, that's why we had to do that one, because it's important to realize that all four of these types, and even some sort of subtypes in between, right? They're coping mechanisms. We said this. These are coping mechanisms to deal with anxiety, attempts to lower anxiety, but that anxiety is 80% legitimate. It's the anxiety of living in the world and dealing with what we call reality. So already, you can see the pathology, and see psychologists may see a bevy of people coming in, hundreds, but they have to boil it down. These are generalized. Okay, oh, I see what this person is talking about. They're one of those four types, and all this palaver they're telling me about, I can see. I've got to take notes, because behind it is the real story. So these four types help, because you can start to see, well, I just did everything for them. I'm here because nobody cares about me. Do you know how nice I've been? Do you know when I raised those kids? And then they wouldn't even invite me over for bar mitzvah or anything like that. I hardly ever see the grandkids. You see, or it'll be another thing. So the psychologist going, oh, that's a depressive type. Okay, now we've got to step forward, and now I can sort of treat this person or advise. And as I said, the typology is very, very interesting. But never forget that these types, pathological types in general, are like loser beta ways of dealing with reality, right? And their coping mechanisms, nothing more. Although you may be, like our audience now knows not to be so dumb as to take these things as genuine expressions of a genuine selfhood, capitalized selfhood. Subjecthood, sure. Persona, yep. Counterfeit self, yep. No problem. We're there, and you'll instinctively know. People don't never even know how to spell psychology, can do it, because they instinctively know when they're meeting somebody that that's what they're kind of dealing with, but they may not have the full language to really enunciate it. And I think that's very dangerous. I'm, making sure that, you can enunciate it. Hang on a second here. Something popped up.
Well, it's funny you say that because when I think back to some of the experiences I had prior meeting these types of people, as you say, that have that warm, bubbly personality,
Hmm.
they do everything to go out of their way for you. But then they stab you in the back or they try to manipulate you, right? You start to sense this. And ever since I experienced that directly, I now have a better radar for it. So I can pick
Yeah.
up those signals that are they're very subtle. And even now, there's still people that are very good at camouflaging it, and then I've also met very genuine people that are just fun to be around, and you can see the difference because they're not trying to demand something of you. They're not only after your attention. They're just genuinely happy people versus the people that are it's a fake. It's virtue signaling. It's I'm pretending to be happy, but really I'm depressed. It's amazing, eh?
It's very easy to be fooled, actually, because most of these types are pretty much rehearsed, strangely enough, in what they're doing. uh, uh, they've had a lot of experience doing what they're doing and getting away with it, because as I said, certain types, they are so friendly and nice and genuinely helpful in the beginning, sweet and all of that. And then we love that. And we also like to be in the presence. I said this on the Psychic Vampirism website. We like to be in the presence of people who make us feel good. That's where the vulnerability
Mm.
comes in. Who wants to be around people who don't make you feel good? You see, so you think that that's a virtue? Yeah, well, watch out. The tragic hero, he dies by way of his virtues, not his vices. Amazingly, right? So and also don't get me wrong. It's good to be nice to folks. As I say, what we're studying right now are more the extreme types who do then manipulate in the end, but also who sabotage their own sense of beinghood. Um, they are damaging their sense of selfhood, in a very strange way. One could say, because remember, you will be rewarded as a child for doing what your parents want. It's a dynamic you don't even think about, and you go on to raise your own kids. So as we said, that one of the malignancies, like you're saying, is that yeah, you might turn your extreme kindness in a way to manipulate people and make them feel obligated. We do find people like that, and it's very hard to turn them down. When you see them in need, or maybe they've done an infraction, but then you let them go because they're so nice. They open the shop in the morning at 4 a.m. in the cold, and they're very, very courteous, and they make sure everybody's got their coffee, and they're just so nice. I've worked with people like that. I find them obnoxious personally, but everybody thinks they're going to win the prize at the end of the month, best worker of the month or whatever they used to give out. I never won it, so it wouldn't matter anyway. But the thing is that all four. No, I got fired. That famous word. Michael,
Same,
we don't
yeah.
think you're happy here. Remember that one? Anybody ever been told that
Yep.
one? I think you'd
You're
be
like, "No
much happier
shit."
somewhere else.
Yeah.
What?
You're like, "No shit, doc. I
No
would be
fucking
happy
shit.
somewhere else."
And I always used to say, yeah, and your job, because you're fucking crap. Get out of that seat right now. But the four, these are just coping mechanisms, and people, you can look that up. And you know, uh, the danger, really, what I try to get to is that the danger is really to themselves. Yeah, they can discomfort a lot of people, but the damage is to selfhood, and that's what is really what psychology is really all about. Establishing what selfhood is, or let's say apophatically, always, 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 what it's not, because that's what it is going to end up being. You can't come upon the divine spirit directly, and you can't come across your even selfhood directly. What we call I, that simple letter I. Yeah, well, you're not going to come across that without a deconstructive apophatic process. But the thing is that what this amounts to, obviously, is when we use the word servant, subject, and slave. That's why we're doing this program today, because the depressive type is the closest to that, with what we call enslavement. Servitude is the better, more appropriate word. Somebody who lives in servitude to individuals, to a family, to siblings, to neighbors, the community, or even in service, like you see these nitwits today, on a social level. But they're in servitude to others or the ideas of others. This is a kind of slavery. It's also sadomasochistic. These psychologists know this, but who's standing up today? Well, you've got Douglas Murray, and that's it. You know, there's Stefan Molyneux. I mean, but against lightweight shit, right? You don't wait around for these Jordan Petersons to hit on this stuff. So this is a sadomasochistic relationship with oneself. Forget about, by the time you've moved out to get on the internet to find some, S&M thing going, you've already lived a whole life of being totally sadomasochistic with yourself and we're going to see why that is. Think about the women, for instance, who purposely multiply hang around thugs or stay in abusive relationships with, husbands from hell. And they'll never tell you why. Well, are we going to find out the answers to these things? Is it to cover their own violence that they're doing to themselves? Smash a lot of plaster to hide a little bit of china. It's a state of camouflage in which they're so rotten to themselves, so hateful and self-loathing, that just hide behind a big ape, and everybody will have sympathy for you. When in fact, you're as much a perpetrator of inner violence, self-violence, which is hardly even understood today, self-sadism, but you hide behind the more obvious cardboard cutout version that everybody can take the Polaroid of. Yeah, and people do that every day.